Hi, and welcome to the Parenting Playbook podcast. Today, I've got Julia with me, who has created an organisation called Sunflower Autism Consultancy. Now, Julia is married with two children. Her daughter has ADHD, and her son, who is 5, her daughter is 7, and her son, who is 5, is neurotypical.
As far as we know, so far. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll see,
absolutely.
but yeah.
So, can you tell me a little bit about what you do, Julia? And what we're going to really talk about today is the challenges in the family dynamics, really, around the sibling challenges that you work with your families, but also the challenges that you face in your own family. I'd also like us to really talk about when we have neurodivergence within our family unit, the impact that that can have on a marriage, essentially. Now, I'm sure you don't mind me saying, but you too are ADHD.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that brings some complexities in all relationships, as you all have. So tell me a little bit about you, what you do, and
Yeah.
all of the above, really.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I'm Julia Gudinchet, and it's fair to say that neurodiversity is sort of like my passion in life, and I come at it wearing many hats, really. So the first thing is I've been in the field for 18 years, supporting neurodiverse families, supporting neurodivergent children, adults, working in schools, in residential units, you name it, both in Switzerland and the UK. And then I started Sunflower Autism Consultancy in 2019 to really to bridge that gap between the kind of what the NHS is able to provide, because of that medical model we have in the UK, where often you get that diagnosis and then they kind of wave you off with a piece of paper and a website and a book reference if you're lucky, and then say bye and that's it. So that's where I hopefully step in and support families. I work one-on-one with families online, and I'm also soon starting my membership, which I'm really excited about. That's going to be for families who maybe don't have the finances to work with me or the time to work with me one-on-one, but want some more strategies and advice around raising neurodivergent children. So that's exciting. And then on a more personal level, yes, I was diagnosed actually as dyslexic, dyspraxic, and with dyscalculia when I was 11 at school. So I had some challenges with that. But then I was diagnosed as ADHD about 4 years ago now, which one of those, it's happening. We see a lot of it in the media at the moment. Lots of people being diagnosed, particularly women about my age, actually, who we all just kind of slipped a bit through the net. And luckily now we know a lot more about ADHD, and particularly in women. So got my diagnosis, complete light bulb moment. I mean, it was so obvious, really, looking back, so that's been a whole kind of process that I've been going through. And then at the same time, yes, my daughter, who's 7, was diagnosed last year. So that's been challenging at times, for sure. And as you say, I'm basically found myself in a situation where, so I've been with my husband Nick for 15 years. He's Swiss, so that's another actually layer of, there's that slight cultural differences there, particularly around the neurodivergency, actually, which perhaps we can discuss as well. But so basically, we've got one neurodivergent parent, one neurotypical parent, one neurodivergent child, one neurotypical child, which, as you say, definitely kind of brings lots of complexity to it. And as I've been working, as you say as well, with families one-on-one and speaking to families on a daily basis, these are the things, these relationships. It's quite nuanced and it's quite specific, and obviously lots of families haven't experienced this, but for the ones that do, it can bring its own challenges, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with people whose children and husband are neurodivergent, and they're seemingly the only neurotypical person within the family. And from what I can establish, it can feel like a really lonely place and quite confusing as well, because their whole household are operating in a certain way, and yet they're operating in a different way. But it can be a really
Yeah.
lonely space, can't it?
Yeah, it's almost like, sometimes compare it to you. It's almost like having to learn another language,
Yeah.
like all that. Speaking of cultures and languages, it's almost like an added layer to that. It's like they're all kind of speaking the same language and you don't quite speak it and you sort of need to learn it. And that's, yeah, when I'm working with families, it's very much, I'm often almost a bit like a mediator or a translator. I'm kind of translating between neurodivergent and neurotypical. Often, not always, but more often than not. For example, if I work with a young person, I'll have sessions with the young person who's neurodivergent, and then I'll be having sessions with the parents as well. sometimes together, sometimes separately, whatever works best for the family. And I'm almost like, yeah, kind of negotiating in between. And, and often the neurotypical parents are really struggling to understand. That's probably the thing that most people come to me about, is really they want to just understand their neurodivergent child, and speak the same language. So that's where I kind of come in to try and translate, really.
I have a bit of a question for you actually around that. And
Yeah.
so it's fair to say that when we're neurotypical, we can flex our minds a little bit more to adjust, to be able to adapt. Of, oh, okay, that makes sense. I need to support my child in X, Y, and Z way, or I need to support my partner in X. This is what they're saying. So they're
Yeah.
saying this, but they mean this, or whatever it happens to be. Just out of interest, do neurodivergent people have the same ability to flex the other way round?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I would say it depends on, what's your specific diagnosis. So, for example, my experience with people with ADHD is they maybe are a little bit more flexible. Historically, we definitely thought of autistic people as not being able to, for example, put themselves in someone else's shoes, is a phrase that was often used,
Mhm.
like during this sort of diagnostic process. But I think we're learning more around this, and some of these things are slight myths. We're realizing they're not necessarily as concrete or as black and white as we thought they were. So I would never use a blanket statement
No.
like, autistic people can't put themselves in someone else's shoes, or autistic people can't do this, because I think that's dangerous, isn't it? And it puts somebody in a box and kind of labels them in a certain way. And it also frames autism in a negative way, because I don't think it's necessarily the case. And for example, we were speaking about women being more diagnosed more with ADHD. And of course, it's the same with autism. Now we're realizing, you can be very sociable, you can be a woman, you can be very intelligent and whatever else, but you can be autistic. So actually, I think the jury's still out is the answer.
Right. And I'm sure the more that we look into this, because again, as I say, we can't go into that fixed frame of thinking that autistic people don't have empathy.
Yeah.
That's essentially what that has been the narrative.
Yes,
His
actually, well, ironically, I would say it's the absolute opposite, and that neurodivergent people are very, very much more emotional, and maybe they don't necessarily show it in the same way as neurotypical people, or maybe they have a different love language, for example, and they're more practical, in the way they show that they love somebody, or for them it's they express it differently. But yeah, actually, autistic people and neurodivergent people actually feel emotions probably much more strongly, if anything. It's just that they perhaps communicate them in a different way.
Yeah, and what's just popped into my mind is a theme that I see is that neurodivergent people often experience a lot of overwhelm and a heightened level to a neurotypical person. So if we were to differentiate between the two, we all experience anxiety,
Yeah.
but neurodivergent people tend to experience a heightened level of anxiety. And the reality is that when we're overwhelmed, we don't actually empathize with anybody, whoever we are.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
if you've
exactly.
got a child or an adult that's in a state of flux when it comes to the overwhelm, which is triggered so easily, that may be where we've missed that actually they do have the capacity to empathize and care and be concerned for somebody else. But when they're in a state of flux themselves, like any human,
Yeah.
we don't we go into ourselves, don't we? We go into that fight, flight, or
Yes.
freeze.
You can't think straight in that moment, can you?
No, no.
And definitely, as you say, I think what I would describe it as is it's like everything with neurodivergent people, everything's much more extreme. So,
Yeah.
as you say, emotions we feel more strongly when we do reach. I talk about the traffic light system, like the green, amber, red. So if we hit red, neurodivergent people often it's a stronger red, basically, and it's, yeah, we feel it a lot more strongly, and it's a lot more extreme than neurotypical people. So yeah, in that moment, and that's where I suppose having an understanding of each other and learning to communicate with each other is really key to try to, and understanding your neurodivergence or your partner's or your child's neurodivergence, to try to avoid those moments and finding out ways to help support them through those moments.
Yeah, because I guess compassion's a big thing here
Yeah.
around, and I'm a big advocate of. We spend a lot of time explaining to people or telling people that they need to understand us, whoever we are.
Yeah.
And actually, people don't always understand, and they're not going to understand, but we do need to accept. So if our partner or our child has been triggered into that space of overwhelm, it's not necessarily about trying to fix it. It's about being compassionate and supporting them in that space.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that makes me think of an example with me and my husband where sometimes I do understand my daughter more, for example, because I've experienced the same thing. So if, say, for example, she's becoming overwhelmed or she's having a meltdown because of sensory issues with her clothes, or, something's going wrong with her hair, or those types of situations, to him, he's a bit like, "Oh, get over it," kind of thing, or he used to be before we kind of knew what was going on, and he's learned to kind of like you say, empathize a bit more now. But to begin with, he might have been a bit like, oh, to get it. Whereas I would have been like a lot more empathetic because I've been like, oh yeah, I've been there. I totally get it. I've had those moments myself, and because maybe I related more to it. So that's definitely one of the dynamics that I think is interesting, you know. But luckily he's learned now that actually, like you say, okay, he might not know how that feels. He's never experienced that himself, but he can have empathy for her once he sort of understands it. I think a level of understanding can lead to empathy as well, can't it? If you kind of know why something's happening and you get it.
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my work, I use a scale of 0 to 10. If we think about anxiety, and I'll say to clients, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being panic, 0 being not anxious at all, where are you on that scale? In a way, we've almost got to extend that scale for neurodiversity to 20, haven't we?
Yes.
A neurotypical mind might only ever reach 10, and we understand 10 or whatever our maximum is. But beyond 10, our brain doesn't respond and react in that way. So I think when a neurodivergent person is going into a state of overwhelm as a neurotypical person, it would be great to go, I don't know what 15 looks like because I've never had that. And often we can only really identify fully with somebody when we understand it ourselves because it's a lived experience, which is what you're describing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the positives of having one of each as a person, so to speak, as the parents is that, and it's good that I have got that lived experience, so I understand it. On the other side, sometimes maybe I overreact to certain situations. I take things more personally. I take things very literally, or I get wound up about certain things. Whereas he's able to say, hang on a minute, this is one of those moments where I need to support you and actually remind you, hang on a minute, it's okay. Let's take this with a pinch of salt, or let's take a step back and take some deep breaths. So that's where I'm really lucky in that it works very well in our marriage. And, of course, there are challenges, and I'm sure he'd have a big list of them for you. But generally speaking, we work quite well together because we kind of have learned, I guess we've learned to speak each other's languages and read each other and support each other with those moments. So now I know how to explain to him, oh, I think what's happening is she's feeling this or this has happened. And he'll be like, all right, okay, yeah. And equally, he's able to say to me, hang on a minute, let's not panic in this situation. Do you remember this happened in this moment? And this was the case. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, thanks. Actually, yeah, you're right. So it's kind of like also a case of kind of communicating with each other compassionately, but not patronizingly. It's getting the right tone, if you know what I mean, as well, often, which, can help, I think.
I think that because what essentially you were talking about there was he helps to reground you.
Yes, that's the word. Yeah, exactly.
He helps you, but he doesn't do that by saying, "Oh, for goodness' sake, you shouldn't be like that," because
get over it.
But actually giving you examples of when you've gone through this before, and how you dealt with it. So that sounds like that can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, it's almost like reminding me, because I think when you're, like we were saying, in that heightened state and you're sort of creeping up from between amber and red, and you're getting up there a little bit, you can't think straight. You're past the point of no return, so to speak. And that's where the panic sets in and the catastrophizing or whatever else. They're definitely things that, I do sometimes in that moment. So yeah, exactly. He knows now how to reground me, and it's almost like reminding me, do you remember this happened? And I'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, thanks.
Reality is we're not just talking about neurodivergence here. We're talking about human beings, because everybody, when they are anxious, needs somebody that's calm and considered and can to reground them. So whether they've gone past 10 or not, Actually, this is a really good conversation to be having, really, about in a marriage when we're trying to support each other, some lovely strategies and ways in which to do that. And very often, I think that when somebody's anxious, we just need somebody who isn't,
Yes,
who's quite grounded,
exactly.
certainly isn't dismissive of
Yes.
that
It's kind of
anxiety.
learning what the other person needs in that moment. One good example is I remember we've just moved to the UK, which is about 10 years ago now. That's, feel very old using these big numbers, but and I remember I had this job that I really hated at the time. I loved this job. I loved working with autistic people, but the company wasn't a good fit for me. And I just wanted to kind of like get it out and kind of what I call sort of ranting and raving. I was ranting and raving a bit, at him. And he was sort of getting a bit frustrated and saying, well, I don't know what you want me to do. This is what we were saying before, that I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know how I can't fix this problem. That's how the company works. And I was sort of like, actually, it was a light bulb moment. And I said, I don't want you to do anything. I just want you to listen, empathize, hand me a glass of red wine or a box of chocolates or, whatever. And but really just listen and empathize. That I don't want you to fix it. And that was a real light bulb moment for both of us. And since then, now he knows, okay, you just want to get it out. You just want me to listen and empathize. And again, everybody has moments like that, of course, but it's probably a bit more extreme because I am neurodivergent. Or maybe I will like go on about it a bit more, and then not let it go as quickly, those sorts of things. But yeah, it's these absolutely, as you say, learning these strategies to support each other through these moments.
Yeah, and as you say, the tools are the same, however,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
whether neurodivergent or neurotypical, and it's great that and I would love if anybody could take one thing from this episode, it would be have that space. And we're not just talking about listening, we're talking about active listening now. We're talking about making that eye contact if possible. We're talking about being so that person can feel heard, because the minute that happens, then all of a sudden our emotions start to disperse. Now, what we do know with the male brain, and that's not to say that it's just men, because women have male brains as well. But with the male brain, they're very steeped in solution finding. So they tend not to sit in that space of overwhelm as much.
Yeah.
Hence why we hear this all the time, where husbands will come up with a solution.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't see that person anymore. I'll leave that job or whatever. And that's not, we're
Not
not
what I want.
looking for solutions. We just want to be heard. So that's a huge tip, I think.
And that's a massive thing for a lot of the parents I work with. This really transfers over. That's the advice I give to parents where their young person or their child is ranting and raving or in a state of overwhelm or in red or having a meltdown, however we want to describe it. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes in that moment, you don't need to be like, can I get the miss or can I do that? Or, it's like actually they just want you to listen. And they just want to be heard, yeah, and they just want a bit of empathy often, and then a moment to kind of to calm down and regulate themselves. So it's definitely something that transfers to lots of different relationships as well and family, doesn't it?
Yeah, because I suspect when there's that heightened emotion, there's a frenetic nature to the individual that's going through that at the time. And if the parent is frenetic trying to fix this thing, is it fair to say that if a parent just stopped and just sat?
Well, that's often my advice is do nothing. Just stay near them. In fact, that's my key tips for, anyone supporting your child through a meltdown is less is more. Keep calm. If you might not be on the inside, at least keep calm on the outside. Fake it till you make it, I say. You inside, your heart might be beating and you might be thinking, but that's fine. We can debrief about that later. But in the moment, at least try and look as if you're staying calm, you're neutral to try and, like you say, ground them, bring them back down. And yeah, just sometimes actually saying nothing is the best thing. But being nearby, checking they know you're there and that maybe you're listening, but even sometimes busying yourself, doing something else, but still being around is better. Because it's like kind of the more we react, sometimes it's putting fuel on the fire, isn't it? And kind of making it worse often.
Absolutely. And when we're in a state of overwhelm, anxiety, we want to feel safe and secure. So if the person beside us is in a state of anxiety,
Yes.
it just gets bigger.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's really hard, isn't it?
Oh,
When
it's with said than done. It's the hardest part. It's the hardest part for sure.
yeah.
And I used to, and I literally like advise people on a daily basis how to do this. But when it would come to me a couple of years ago and I was going through this kind of I suppose the beginning of the whole realizing that my daughter was neurodivergent as well. Ironically, at the time, I was still a bit in denial. I kept thinking she'll grow out of it, she'll grow out of it, even though, this is my profession. But and at the time, I would, when she sort of would get upset or have these meltdowns, I would really panic. And again, potentially because I am neurodivergent myself, I was getting up there quickly as well. And what I've really had to teach myself is, yeah, to manage that and to, to control it, and kind of an element of co-regulation, which can work really well sometimes. Um, but it is a skill that I think it is a skill that you can learn, and neurodivergent people can learn it as well. With practice, like anything, you can get better at it and become more confident, and supporting these types of situations.
Um, do you find that you just mentioned that, oh, she'll grow out of it, she'll grow out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you find that there's quite a lot of resistance around acceptance that actually our child may be neurodivergent? And why might that be, do you think?
Yeah, I think there is. And even for myself, like I say, which I live and breathe neurodiversity, it's my passion in life. But even I, to some, for some reason, was not in denial necessarily, but I just didn't realize really. And yeah, just kept thinking it was age related. I think it is difficult at the end of the day, to accept, even though obviously I'm neurodiversity advocate, and I try to, educate and advocate and be, explain the positives to people. But there are challenges that come with it, of course. Otherwise we wouldn't be sat here today, and I wouldn't be, have a job, and neither would you probably. So, but I think it is difficult ultimately to accept that potentially your child is different, because that might mean things will be difficult for them. And although there's a lot more awareness now, still not everywhere you go, people, there's definitely a lot more, isn't there? And things like the sunflower lanyards, and there's a lot more understanding. And airports have like sensory rooms, and football stadiums, and sensory friendly or autism friendly sessions at cinemas, and various different places, which is brilliant. Supermarkets, there's definitely more understanding and more advocacy. But on a day-to-day basis, it's still sometimes challenging in certain environments, and maybe in certain families, if there's preconceptions of negativity around these labels. So I think it's a process that you go through as a parent, for sure, like acceptance and how to manage it. And there's a lot of highs and lows. Everything's very extreme. For me, that's the thing I think is the hardest thing, is the extreme highs and lows that it can bring with it, with having a neurodivergent child. It's
Yeah.
it's definitely a challenge.
And
But
you mentioned earlier about culture.
funnily enough, so my husband Nick is, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he said, it's okay to talk about this today, but at the beginning of this, where I was, and this often happens, I've seen with families where there's one parent who's slightly further ahead in this kind of journey, for want of a better word, who is sort of the one that does the research and is starting to get the understanding, and then there's often one who's not quite there yet, and it's not that you have to persuade them, but you have to like help them to kind of see what's really going on, and help them have a better understanding of it. And in our case, it was definitely me, because I was speaking with the school, just purely because I guess I was in touch with the school a bit more often, because I do the school run a bit more often. And I was like getting some feedback from the teacher, and I'd been in touch with the Senko, and I was beginning to realize, okay, hang on a minute. And obviously I'd had my diagnosis. So I was like, there's a genetic or hereditary element. Whereas he was still a bit like, oh, and he's a very kind of liberal, modern guy. Like, we parent 50-50. He's an amazing papa, they call him, incredible husband, incredible guy. One of my favorite people in the world. But being from Switzerland, where the culture is slightly different, he did still have this mindset that he was really worried. He wasn't worried about the fact that she potentially was ADHD, because, he's lived with me for 15 years, so he's used to that. He finds it a little bit easier, funnily enough. But I think he was very worried that getting a diagnosis would lead to a label which would have a negative impact. And what I was trying to say to him was, for me, I could only see positives, because I thought that would help her know herself better, which would then help her self-esteem, her mental health. It would also help support become in place, hopefully at school, which luckily she has. It would just help us understand how to parent her better as well. And obviously we could do research and that kind of thing. Whereas he was coming at it from a very different point of view, which I think was, partly because he's from Switzerland, where there's a bit behind with some of this stuff. Sorry, Switzerland, I love Switzerland, but it is a little bit, having worked out there, they are quite behind. with their understanding. And he just had this real negative. And then, but it was quite funny because I said, no, I don't think there are any negative connotations to it. But listen, and then so we said, well, we'll just have a pause with this conversation because like go and take some deep breaths. And we both went back to work or whatever. And then he went away and did some research. And then he kind of came back to me. He said, oh, I'm a bit cross with you actually. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And he said, you're right. There is no negative connotations. I did loads of research and everybody says it's a positive thing actually. So luckily for me, he kind of went away, did the research and realized that, yeah, actually it's not a negative thing. But it did surprise me when he had that reaction. Because like I say, I think of him as quite a kind of modern person, if that makes sense. And I wouldn't think of him as having that negative connotation about it, especially given myself and my job and all of that, which he's really supportive and loves. But yeah, I do think that was a bit of a cultural difference. And I do work with people all over the world, and it's still, we think it's tough here to access support. My goodness, some of the other countries, it's even harder, and they are a bit behind with all of this stuff. So there's definitely a cultural element to it. Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that none of us have children with a view of we anticipate. We know that they'll have life struggles, but whether it be neurodiversity, disability, whatever it happens to be, none of us want to see our children or think that our children are going to have a tough ride.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's quite a heavy dose of denial in there initially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And understandably, because they're going through a grief cycle of this isn't what I want for my child, not necessarily for themselves, but for their child.
Oh, absolutely. And I think for me, and I've spoken to other people who've had similar feelings. I was thinking, oh no, looking back to things where I'd had real struggles, like at school, and thinking, oh, I really struggled with certain situations like exams or whatever it might be, social situations, and looking back and thinking, oh, challenges I've had, and thinking, oh no, I don't want her to have to kind of have those same challenges. So you've got that, if you are neurodivergent or you're realizing you're neurodivergent, which a lot of people do after they realize their child is, they're kind of thinking, oh no, I don't want them to kind of go through what I did, and as well, which can be difficult, I think. But that kind of spurred me on. In my case, it spurred me on to find out for sure and get the diagnosis and get the support in place even more, because I was like, well, I found out when I was 38 that I had ADHD. Imagine she's found out when she's 6. So hopefully it's just kind of normality for her. And if she has the support in place, hopefully we'll avoid some of the challenges that I have.
And again, I've worked with older people that are neurodivergent, and I think one of the biggest challenges they often have is very silently, I think this is fair to say, very silently in the younger years, they know they're different. Are they a bit weird? Are they odd? Is there something wrong with them? But all of that is an internal conversation.
Yes. And it's internalized very negatively, of course.
Exactly. With the diagnosis, at least there's this thing of, well, I am different.
Yeah.
Brain work. That's okay. 100%. But suddenly turns it into a positive rather than.
Imagine the effect that can have on your self-esteem and your well-being. That it really is a massive. And I look back and actually for 38 years, I thought I was really thick. That was a word I would associate with myself, which is terrible, isn't it? People wouldn't have thought that, because outwardly I'm, a confident kind of person, fairly successful. I've got a master's degree. I've got a degree. I speak fluent French. I run a business, lots of things. But I genuinely thought I was thick and stupid and not academic. And I kind of was put in this box by my family, by school, by myself for my entire life. And that's why I'm always getting a bit emotional talking about it, because finding out that I had ADHD genuinely was like, I'm not these things. I'm not in this negative box. I just learn differently. My brain is wired differently. I'm a Mac. I'm not a PC. And actually they were trying to teach a PC, and that's why it wasn't working. It wasn't me in a way, it was them. So I thank my lucky stars that we've got the diagnosis for my daughter, and that she hopefully won't have to go through that. And even though the challenges still are there, at least you know why, and you have an understanding of why.
And you can deal with that. Whereas that compound nature of
letting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Because our internal chatter can be way worse than anything that's coming to us externally. And I think that, again, the confusion that often comes with neurodivergence about how the world operates, all of a sudden it's not confusing anymore.
Yes.
It's just.
And it's not only that, but there's other people like you who are wired like you, and you can find your. And this is why I say to people, one of the best things you can do for your child's mental health and well-being is talk to them about their neurodivergence, educate them about it, help them understand it. So it's so important for them to feel more confident and for their own well-being, help them find their tribe. Maybe there's other people like them, that they can kind of play Minecraft online with, or whatever it might be, and that is something that I think, I'm quite passionate about sharing that with families to really help both the child and the whole family.
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes me quite nicely to the sibling nature of
Yeah.
when you've got a neurotypical and a neurodiverse child. Now, again, we have this attitude or idea that when we have children, we parent them in exactly the same way. And the reality is, if we do, we shouldn't be, because
No.
each individual is unique. And I certainly learned this with my daughter and my son. Very, very different characters, very, very different responses to differing parenting strategies and ways of being. And I remember my daughter saying from time to time, "Oh, he gets away with X, Y, Z." I would never have got away with that. But it was simply because he did need to be parented differently to how she did, because of very, very different personalities.
Yeah.
But I suspect, again, that's just extended.
Yes. More extreme, as with everything.
Yeah, yes.
As I like to say.
Tell me, because your daughter is 7 and your son is 5.
Yes.
So tell me how that plays out in your family.
So yes, I certainly realised, I mean, I suppose fairly early on, given that they're 5 and 7, you could say that I cannot parent them in the same way, and I have to parent them in a very individual way. And actually, it's quite a good comparison, really, because it's quite clear cut. So my son, who's 5 and neurotypical, responds really well to what I would describe, I guess, as gentle parenting. So, I mean, I'm not a gentle parenting expert, so don't quote me on that. But what I mean by that is kind of, if I just explain things to him, kind of quite kindly, really, and I just say, "Oh, look, listen, we are going to be late for school if we don't tidy up now. So we do really. Can you help mummy to tidy up?" Now, admittedly, he's 5, and I'm not saying that this is going to work forever. But at the moment, those types of just explaining to him why, and basically asking him nicely, and just reasoning with him, and saying, "Oh, it'd be really helpful and kind if you could do this for me." He'll be like, "Okay," and he'll kind of go off and do it, and then he'll be like, "Oh, I've done it, mum," and he'll be all happy with himself, and I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much, it'd be really helpful." And whereas with my 7-year-old, that's just never been the case. I've actually, that was more natural for me as a parenting style. I'm the good cop, I suppose. If you had to be, we tried to be obviously on the same page, but I'm definitely it would be, if there was a good cop, bad cop, it would be me. So that's more my style. And actually, I found it harder with my daughter, because what I have to do with her is I have to be quite succinct and quite clear and quite firm, actually. And for me, it almost comes across sometimes as if I think, oh, people might think I'm speaking really rudely to her, or I don't really like to speak to her like that. But actually, I need to. So I need to be quite succinct with instructions, because otherwise she'll get overwhelmed. It has to be like one at a time, those kind of things. And so I really have to say to her, "Do this, please." And for me, it's like I feel as if I'm almost being a bit rude, but that's just what she needs me to do. And so there's definitely differences. Another example is transitions. So with my little boy, he likes a soft transition, I'd call it. So he likes a good 10-minute warning and then a 5-minute warning, which is probably a more typical way that we all parent, right? And we let them know. And then it's right, how do we feel about getting the shoes on? And then it's okay, let's do the coat. And it would kind of take our time, and he likes to take his time. He doesn't like to be hurried, and that's fine. Whereas with my daughter, if I do that, she'll go and start. I turn around and she's like off painting her nails and sitting down and watching the TV, and getting distracted by putting music on and dancing around the kitchen, quite, I suppose, almost like stereotypical kind of. And I should say I'm exactly the same. And sometimes we are dancing around the kitchen to the Spice Girls, and we should be getting ready to go to school. And that's my fault entirely, because I've been distracted as well. So, this is not blaming in any way, but that's just how she is and how she works. And so with her, I have to do quite a quick transition. So I have to be like, right, quick, okay, coat on, we're going now. Otherwise, she sort of, gets too distracted. So that's really challenging, because obviously I'm trying to do both at the same time, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's a complete chaos, like everybody, I guess. But yeah, there's just a couple of examples of things. Another example might be, because a lot of people come to me and say, I'm parenting them differently. This is bad. I feel really guilty about this. And that's where I say, no, you're doing exactly the right thing. We do have to parent individually, as you say. And one of the reasons they feel guilty about that is because they see it's going to be perceived as being unfair, like you say, that your daughter was like, it's not fair, and that is definitely a challenge. But I think this is where we were speaking about this earlier, the kind of being open and honest and transparent about these things. So, for example, my son said to me, "Oh, why does Lily have a quiet spot?" Because she has this little calm spot where she goes if she needs to kind of recharge after school, for example, or if she's having a meltdown. Sometimes she goes in there to self-regulate. And he sort of said, literally the day that I made it for her, he said, "Oh, how come Lily's got a calm spot?" And I just said, "Oh, because sometimes she gets a bit upset and she needs to go in there." And he said, "Well, how come I don't have one?" And I said, "You don't need one." And he went, "All right, okay." And that was it. Do you know what I mean? Again, I know he's 5, so perhaps it's a bit easier. But it was just, I think, just being honest and just explaining it was like, that's it really. And often, actually, if you're just honest with children and young people, they take things easier than you think they might, and certainly helping them understand the neurodiversity. Of course, as he gets older, I plan to read books with him about neurodiversity and just explain that that's why she is like that, for example. So I think being open and honest about these things and helping them to understand it can really help.
I think this is really interesting, because what's come into my mind there is that I don't doubt that there are families up and down the country where the youngest child is starting to emulate the eldest child, and it's really difficult to know, are they falling into that category, or are they copying? Because if that communication isn't there, and let's just say the neurodiverse child is getting more attention because they are struggling more, then it wouldn't be a massive leap for a younger child subconsciously to be thinking,
Yeah.
well, I'm just getting left in the cold here. If I start kicking up,
And
that's a
100%.
question mark for
Oh,
families. Yeah.
100%. And it's not all rainbows and unicorns. I definitely see that happening already with my youngest. So Lily can be quite blunt sometimes, and she doesn't always realise. And it's something we're working on together. And I talked to her about it, and I sort of say to her, "Oh, that was a bit sounded a bit rude." And obviously there are times where she is in like amber and red, and she does say things, and it comes across as quite rude. And I have noticed that my son is stuck, sort of getting a little bit, copying that tone of voice a little bit. So there are moments where I sort of say, "Oh, well, can we just be kind, a little bit more kindly with each other and everything like that?" So there's definitely big challenges with that. One of the things that I suggest to people and that I try to do is make sure, if possible, to have some one-on-one time with both of them. The kind of love bombing style sort of thing. I mean, not within reason. We're not all multimillionaires. I'm not going to fly them to Hawaii or anything like that. But like for example, this Saturday, actually, funnily enough, I'm having a one-on-one day with my little boy, because I do have constant guilt. Since the minute he was born, I had constant guilt because he was the second child, that he was going to suddenly be the poor second child. There's, again, this narrative that we kind of create. But I am, and of course, I do spend probably more energy, helping Lily when she's having meltdowns. We do have to have some one-on-one time, and things like that. So it's something I'm really conscious of, and I don't want him to obviously feel that. So I try to have all these one-on-one days together with both of them, and particularly with my younger child. But of course, it's such a juggle for lots of families, I know.
I think if we're possible, spending quality time together on a one-on-one basis is really important, whether it be 10 minutes or a whole day or a few hours. If we can capture some of that time, that can make all the difference. But I love this, your son's 5 years old. In theory, you could say, well, 5-year-olds don't really understand a lot, but I think opening up that level of communication about his sister and the challenges that she faces, all of a sudden enables that, get some clarity between, well, my parents or my mum is doing this because Lily needs it, not because my mum's doing this because she prefers Lily, or my mum's doing this because Lily's kicking up, so I'll kick up, so it really sort of creates that lovely clarity between the two, doesn't it? And shows that they're just different people.
Absolutely. And they really are, because it's funny, he's so much more independent. But also what it does is it creates, like, he's a really sweet and caring little boy, actually. But what he does sometimes, if Lily's upset, and he will come over and just kind of like put a cuddly toy next to her and then walk away, which is so sweet. And he's in those moments, he's actually they're so kind of intuitive sometimes. And he, like you say, he's very young, but already he's understanding, okay, she's having like a moment. She's not doing so well. There are times, of course, when I have to say, he tries to be a little brother and, and comes and tries to annoy her. And I have to say, it's not really a good time right now, is it? Let's go over here and do this. But generally speaking, and this is something I say, because something else that comes up often from the families I work with one-to-one is they have this guilt around the fact that the neurotypical child or sibling, whatever their age, might have to step into a bit of a young carer role at some point, particularly if the neurodivergent child has more complex needs, for example, and obviously does need that extra level of support. Then parents understandably feel quite guilty about that. But one of the things I say is definitely that it does create, these young carers often are the most empathetic, understanding people that you'll find when they get older, because they've lived with somebody a bit different, they've understood it, and this is where again this understanding comes in, and often they have a wonderful relationship, sibling relationship. Not always, that's another challenge that can happen, but sometimes it does. You find that they actually are really caring individuals, and it's
and I suspect their empathy starts to form much younger than the average child's empathy, because that, as you say, it's a lived experience. They're living in an environment where that's harvested and needed for their sibling and their parents, I suspect. So I suspect they mature a little bit quicker than the average neurotypical child, because that would be the case in a variety of situations.
Actually, that's what, funny enough, I said that to a parent this week, because they did say to me, I get worried that the sibling is growing up too quickly because of this situation. And that's what I said, but that can happen in so many different situations, for various different reasons, can't it? Because it's a single parent household, because the parent works away, because you're the oldest, sometimes it's just that thing about where you are placed in the family, isn't it? Or you're an only child, or whatever it might be. So I think, but of course, as parents, we get the classic kind of parent guilt, don't we, about these things?
Yeah.
They're not always a bad thing.
No, I mean, it would be lovely if we could just section all of this off and, and go, well, this is definitely this. But if you think about, even with neurodivergence, and, I appreciate it's a neurological thing, but, these are also just human behaviors.
Yeah.
It's just an extreme.
We're not aliens. We're not aliens.
No.
And we're just people.
Everybody experiences those human behaviors, but on a slightly different level.
On a smaller scale. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, again, it's just more extreme. And this is a phrase I use a lot because it's very true. Yeah, we're not aliens, I promise. We just have slightly different brains, work slightly differently, but we try and learn your language, you try and learn our language, and it can work.
Absolutely. So tell me just a little bit about the relationship side of things, because I said this to you earlier, didn't I, about there's a lot of support for children and parents to support children, but you don't really hear a vast amount about the relationship, whether you've got a neurodiverse child or actually one of the parents is neurodiverse, and the challenges that a couple might face as a result of that. Can you expand on that a little bit for me and your experience?
I mean, it's definitely something that I do, and I kind of almost fell into doing because it comes so often. What happens is I start working with the parents in terms of giving them support for the child, like the neurodivergent child, as you say. And then as I actually end up working with like every member of the family, like the sibling, maybe one-on-one with the young person themselves, and then with the parents and working on their relationship. And again, acting almost sometimes as a little bit of a translator and a mediator. And often it's when there is one neurodivergent and one neurotypical parent, and they kind of just need that help to understand each other, to communicate with each other. I think where that does have challenges, in my experience, is that when you've got one of each neurotype in the parents, that of course means they do often have different communication styles, and therefore they have different parenting styles. And that's when it can become a challenge. And so trying to get them both on the same page, and they're often, by the time they get to me, they're aware of this, and they're like, we know we need help with this. They've kind of figured out that that's the issue, and that they're doing things. And actually, sometimes I say what I say about the parenting each child differently. Sometimes I say that's okay if it's not actually creating problems, and you have different styles.
Absolutely,
that's okay. Obviously, if it is causing problems, then it's something maybe we need to work on. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think sometimes we're quite relieved to hear that sometimes. People are relieved to hear that sometimes.
Yeah, 'cause sometimes, it's about having a balance. We are talking about being on the same page with each other, but I think even just acknowledging the differing parenting styles and the beliefs and the values and the behaviors is so, 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 so important, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think recognizing that, because again, if you think about it, you will have come from a certain style of parenting, or probably two styles of parenting, and your husband will have
Yes.
done well.
Yes.
And you've also got the cultural difference in there.
And you have got the kind of, like I mentioned earlier, the sort of good cop, bad cop thing where some people do have a more authoritative
Yeah.
style. And I think with us, that's definitely, it's changed now. So I would say at the beginning, w- again, I think it's slightly cultural that my husband, it came more from this, well, I'm the parent and therefore I'm in charge and they need to do what I'm telling them to do. Whereas I have spent 18 years working in the field of neurodiversity and also studying sort of like parenting and strategies and how to work with like gentle sort of strategies and unconditional parenting strategies and these types of things. So I came at it with a bit of a different point of view and more the kind of like empathy, using empathy and understanding and connection and collaboration and those types of things. So, but what I think luckily has most of the time has happened is we've found a bit of a balance in between. And that we both sort of taught each other a little bit. Perhaps like I say, I've had to learn to be a bit firmer, particularly with my daughter, where that works better because she does need more structure, more firm boundaries, having ADHD, definitely. And he's probably had to maybe be a bit more gentle as well and a bit more understanding. And again, I think having a neurodivergent child has really helped with that. Actually, funnily enough, I think that's one of the positives. Now I sort of think of it, is that was a knock-on effect. I think for him was he's had to think of parenting in a different, very different way. Actually,
Yeah. And this is something that I'm a huge advocate of, is that all parents, I think, really need to be exploring their parenting style and the way they were parented and what that means as a couple when you bring those two styles together. It's- What I agree with you. I think in many ways, this is quite confronting having neurodivergence in your family,
yeah,
but it makes you go, oh, okay, I need to understand this. I need to explore this. I need to go and look at this.
yeah,
Whereas actually, parents of neurotypical children may not even give it a second thought. It was just how we are. It's
yeah,
just how we are. And
yeah,
then
quite done. Yeah,
can create a bit of a divide, can't it? Because so many parents parent very, very differently, and
yes.
this creates conflict. Whereas, by the sounds of it, you and your husband have a lot of communication about how you're raising your children.
Yeah. I think also where we're maybe a bit lucky is he does tend to take my lead. And now that's partly because I'm ADHD myself. I think it's also because of the nature of my work and what I do. And, he obviously kind of respects the understanding I have in that. So he does take my lead a bit. But that's interestingly, though, I do also see that, like I say, because there's often these couples where there's one that's slightly further ahead, who's done more of the reading, done more of the research, and there's one who's still a bit on the fence about the whole, yeah, but shouldn't they kind of be doing what we're telling them to do
Yeah.
thing? And
Yeah.
then that's where sometimes it is difficult to take that advice from your partner, I
Yeah.
think. So
Yeah.
that's where often I come in and it's a bit like, well, they don't necessarily want to listen to me, but they will listen to Julia. And again, when I'm sort of slightly mediating between the two or getting the conversation started and
Yeah.
then leaving the ball in their court for
Yeah.
them to then go away and communicate more about that and just,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's,
But isn't just questioning your beliefs and your experiences of being a child and how that does translate into the way in which we parent.
yeah,
So, but just even questioning that, I think we all need to do that.
indeed.
Because I think today's generation needs something different to
Yeah,
what
because things do change, don't they? We do have a different understanding of parenting now than we did, in the 80s and or 90s or even,
Yeah,
quite recently. Things evolve, progress very quickly.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And yes, it's true that I think having a neurodivergent child does that. It really makes you, like you say, it makes you question, oh,
yeah,
I do need to do this a bit differently. And definitely for me, it highlighted in particular the whole parenting them both in a different way and being
yeah,
more mindful of that and more conscious of that and
yeah.
realize that that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to ask you, if there is one tip that you can give to parents that are struggling, but find themselves in this space where there's a mixture of neurodivergence and neurotypical people within the family home, what would that one piece of advice be?
I suppose I would say what we've already probably touched on, which is the honesty is the best policy. Transparency for me is so important for so many reasons, partly because of this kind of slightly old fashioned, sweep it under the carpet, because that leads to feelings of shame and feelings of embarrassment and negativity towards themselves and their neurotype, whichever family member that might be. So I think if you can kind of find out what's going on in terms of accessing a diagnosis. I know not everybody can do that because there's waiting lists and all those sorts of things, but certainly if you can reach out for some help and support, but just kind of looking into it, understanding it. There's lots more resources out there now. There's so many more resources. There's books for children, just literally on Amazon that you can get. YouTube, there's loads of great videos. I'm doing a talk at my daughter's school for Neurodiversity Celebration Week to the year 2 children, and I've got a presentation. I'm going to play them a video that was on Newsround, and it's brilliant. And it's neurodivergent children talking about neurodivergence, so they explain it really well. They explain it better than I can, So show them videos, read them books, have it just be a completely normal part. That's what we try to do in our families. It's not a big deal. It's not. We don't talk about it all the time. I'm not obsessed with it, but it's just a fact of life that 2 of us happen to have ADHD, and that's it. And everyone's kind of aware of that and has an understanding of. And the other thing is, you've got to have a laugh sometimes. Laugh at yourselves and laugh about it, because
Yeah.
that's for sure is the other thing.
And just sort of picking some pieces out of what you've just said, which was brilliant, by the way. But communication, from what you're saying, communication is key. Transparency, I think, is a really interesting conversation to have and concept.
Yeah.
As human beings, reality is, I think we all would like a transparency within our relationships, because it breeds safety, it breeds trust, and it breeds respect. And if we think about neurodivergence, the nuances of sarcasm or the unspoken word, actually, there needs to be that sense of clarity and that transparency and that openness and honesty.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the main thing, actually, I think. I think the key word would be communication. And
Yeah,
that's something that my husband and I have really worked on, worked very hard at. We're not lucky. We've worked very hard at it. Some days we work very hard at it, and we make mistakes along the way, of course. But yeah, I think just communicating with each other,
yeah,
the whole family, with the
yeah.
whole family is really important.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I'll be looking to release this episode in March, because is it the 18th is
Uh,
Celebration Week?
18th to the
24th, isn't it? Yeah. So I'll be releasing this episode in that week as well. And I will put all of your details in the show notes. So if anybody wants to be able to access you, that would be
Please
amazing.
do get in touch. If anybody needs support, I do offer a free chat. If anyone needs any advice or any support at all and they're struggling in any reason, please do get in touch. I'm here to support them.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.